Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Abdul Rahman, and the title of my talk for today is Implementing Compliance in DeFi. So I wanted to start with a definition first for DeFi, or what genuine DeFi means. And I think everybody's aware of this. This is just a slight review as we sort of set the stage for how we can implement compliance. Users engage in self-directed transactions. They maintain independent control. The transactions occur on chain. And one thing that's key here is really the punchline is decentralized infrastructure without compromising user privacy. So really the theme of the talk today is, can we apply what we understand as compliance to DeFi without infringing upon a user's privacy or by violating what privacy is as we understand it? So now that we've set the stage of sort of what we're going to talk about, I think it's important that we motivate why we need this to happen. And so I'll just say in blunt terms, DeFi and crypto has been seriously victimized by many, many bad actors over the past 10, 15 years, and continues to be. As you can see, the uptick from 2021 to 2022, in 2023, and hopefully not in 2024, where a lot of DeFi protocols, crypto infrastructure, et cetera, was really been the victim of large-scale theft, which possibly could have been prevented by both a combination of security controls along with compliance. So even though compliance is not the end-all be-all, it's not the actual complete answer, it is part of the solution for what we want to look at. And what motivates this, and I could have built this slide with like about 50 different things, but I just chose the top 6 hacks. And the only thing that I really want to point out is recency and dollar amount. So these are not things like $40 out of the ATM. These are 9-figure transactions where very, very sophisticated nation states, advanced persistent threats have targeted weak infrastructures, poor security controls, lack of compliance, to basically make away with a lot of good people's hard-earned money. And when that happens, the government gets involved. And typically, what's happened over the past 60 years in central exchanges, there have been more emphasis on compliance. And so even though this is not the end-all be-all and central exchanges do get hacked, I think for what we all can agree on today, we lack some key aspects in our current community that we could make do with. So this is the why, right? So now we want to talk a little bit more about what is our current understanding of this. So hopefully everybody is not allergic to this slide or it gets completely run off. I don't see anyone running away immediately. But what we mean by compliance is really alignment with the Banking Secrecy Act. And the Banking Secrecy Act is older than me. It's been around President Nixon, 1970. And so I wanted to basically focus on, instead of talking about its long history, what are the core elements to be in compliance or in alignment with BSA? Number 1, you need a compliance officer. You need a human being that's responsible for compliance for your project, your infrastructure. Number 2, you have to build risk assessments. You have to complete them. Number 3, you have to have policies and procedures related to anti-money laundering, AML. You have to maintain and monitor this program. And you have to implement customer due diligence, which is the equivalent of going to a bank account and getting KYC'd, giving your driver's license, and so forth. Now, if you look at the previous slide, where a lot of money has been made off and more will probably happen, the actual controls for security along with compliance may not stop everything, but according to what we have today, we lack a lot of infrastructure on the compliance and security side that could help thwart this. However, in order to apply compliance to this, the current state of affairs is that we would sacrifice privacy. Okay, so I was originally just going to have the figure here with no words to kind of illustrate how do you launder money, right? And so the idea around laundering money is essentially a person uses a series of intermediaries to convert from one form of currency to another hands this off to another person that really does something in an opposite direction, right? And so for anti-money laundering, you want to essentially address concealing funds acquired through illicit means. And some of these illicit means do harm to individuals, do harm to critical infrastructure and key resources, whether it's transportation, food, and water. These institutions, these financial institutions today use KYC heavily to really vet individuals that show up into the ecosystem. And then finally, this Anti-Money Laundering Act, which is in alignment with BSA that I mentioned previously, is about identifying, tracking, and reporting transactions. So a key element for compliance that I mentioned in addition to the previous 5 is you want to be able to have some kind of monitoring program for transactions. So this is key as we move forward. So really the first sort of hypothesis we have is, can we arrive at genuine DeFi without sort of compromising an individual's privacy? Wall of text, I've been sort of criticized on this, but there's a couple things that you should know that are key. I put these in a different sort of font. When you see currency exchanges, it means custody. When you see administrator or administration, it means issuing and redeeming. And if ever you take custody of a currency, or you issue and redeem it, in other words, you wrap a token, what the current compliance infrastructure in the US says today is you need to register as a money service business or a money transmitting business. And this is interesting because today there's a lot of projects that have not done that. And so typically, as we've seen sanctioned in the first few slides, where there were 6 different hacking attempts, those particular projects may not have been as rigorously involved in both security controls and compliance from this perspective. Travel rule compliance, 2019, FinCEN issued guidance stating this travel rule applies to what we'll call virtual currency transactions. So this is not fiat currency. This is something that is the equivalent of fiat, which is virtual currency. And whether you decide to take custody of it or you issue or redeem it, this travel rule is applicable. And this anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism regulations are all under this notion of Banking Secrecy Act. And so customer due diligence, monitoring transactions, report suspicious activities, and compliance. So these are some of the ingredients that you need to achieve compliance. FATF recommendations, guidance basically suggesting that virtual assets and VASPs aligned with BSA. And so there are gray areas here that have to be negotiated. But if you're all the way to the left, meaning you're not even doing any of these things, you're operating on risk, and likely the security controls for your project are probably not going to be capable of withstanding nation state or APT type of attacks. It was suggested that maybe we talk a little bit about some attempts, right? So in the box on the left, what I've tried to do is gather the requirements for compliance, right? And so in simple terms, if we were to list these out, we talked about MSB, we talked about anti-money laundering program, we talked about reporting, we talked about sharing customer information for transactions that are a certain amount. In the US, if you go into the bank and you try to withdraw or deposit over $10,000, they write an SAR for you, or basically you need to register with the government. You have to conduct customer due diligence, KYC and KYT. So how do you conduct these things from a requirement side on compliance without infringing on privacy in the context of genuine DeFi? And so there have been several projects that made these attempts in the past, and what they've done is they have either built up restricted liquidity pools, or they have empowered tokenization, or they have different kind of app chain services. But the key thing here is protecting transactions, validating transactions to determine whether it's suspicious, and being able to intersect that with enough KYC to maintain genuine DeFi. So there is a path, even though it's small, where you can actually maintain genuine DeFi while also preserving privacy. And so as I kind of round out, I've kind of highlighted in red what are some of the key elements that you could include to achieve this balance, right? And this balance is achieved really by maybe leveraging kind of intelligence software to provide near real-time risk assessments, overseeing exposure, SDN lists, OFAC lists, and other lists for money laundering, fraud, and other things, enabling screening of risk exposure. A lot of the compliance regulations are about assessing risk. Again, implementing continuous monitoring, looking at transaction flow, evaluating transaction flow, assessing it, determining if there's a risk score associated with transactions. And then once you do that, once you've assessed that a transaction is suspicious, do you have the capabilities within your tech, or can you partner with groups or projects that can dynamically update whether individuals have good transactions or potentially are commingling with bad transactions? And this is really this notion of what are called association sets, which are fundamentally white and black lists. And they give you the ability to mitigate risk of commingling suspicious funds in very unique ways. So these are some of the elements that compliance would need to bring to the table, intermingled with technology and DeFi today, from a technical perspective, that could help us to achieve what we're talking about in the long run of bringing more rigorous compliance while maintaining genuine DeFi. And finally, I've achieved the end. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions if there are any. Please do ask. Yes. Great, that's a great question. So Oxbow provides DeFi guardrails. We are an association set provider. Right now we are presently integrated with privacy pools. This week privacy pools will be achieved on mainnet. Privacy pools consists of several components: a relayer, a contract, and an ASP. And the ASP is the whitelisting and blacklisting function. And essentially, as transactions are about to be relayed into the DeFi ecosystem, they are passed to Oxbow, where we determine the suspiciousness or risk assessment of those particular transactions, and then provide that information to the relayer. And based upon whether they are suspicious or not, we add them to an inclusion list, or we add them to an exclusion list. And this type of transaction flow analysis is the first of its kind in the industry. So we're the first company that's really the ASP that's out there first, really trying to push the envelope. Yes? That's a great question. Okay, it's telling me I got 7 minutes, so I'm going to use like a minute or two for this one. If you subtract out the fear of going to prison, and I found out yesterday what prison means. Prison means going to an establishment that's not your house over a year, right? Jail is under a year. If you remove all of those things, right, and you look at sort of the legal framework that exists for things like taking custody, right, where you basically want to move a currency from one place to another via a relayer, or you do administration like you wrap a token, you have to register as a money service business, which immediately means that you need to pay for, hire, and support and nurture a compliance team to do all of the auditing and logging that I mentioned. Now, from a technical perspective, right, maintaining a relayer or wrapping tokens are things that technical teams are doing in spades. There are plenty of projects doing that. However, the ability for native Web3 applications, decentralized exchanges, or protocols to interact with Oxbow, we have to become a money service broker, a money service provider, money transmitting business, in order to wrap a token legitimately so that other protocols and dexes can use it. So the main gap is the time it takes and the effort it takes to become an MSB to be legitimate without the fear of going to prison in order to do that. I don't think that there are extensive technical challenges. I think it's really balancing the compliance part with the continuous monitoring, with what you need to do to nurture and sustain a money service business compliance team. And that really is in a situation, for example, and I don't know if it's really been done, but how do you file a SAR in crypto? How do you do something like that? Someone's going to move around 10 ETH, right? That's like 30K. I got to file a SAR for them. Well, is there an automatic way to do that? And do people really want to do that? So legitimately, what does that mean? And so working with the government means kind of dealing with, and I said that there, the BSA is 1970, it's older than me. So, part of that is really trying to get a clear understanding of what is enough while not, issuing this, privacy issue. Essentially, to kind of, go further, not everybody wants to KYC that wants to come into the ecosystem. No one wants to scan in their, driver's license. So this gets to the use of, within Oxbow, we're using zero knowledge proofs to essentially support the privacy pool ecosystem for whitelisting and blacklisting. And we think that going down this path is necessary, right? If you looked at like the third slide, there's 6 major hacks over 420 million. That's not like a movie, it's not like Netflix and chill kind of money. That's serious cash. And that represents a lot of people's potential earned money, but just think of its situation where it's someone's retirement or another, organization that wants to put their 401k into DeFi. How would they go about doing it? They need to have a mechanism that's compliant. So I know I gave you the kitchen sink. I still got 3.5 minutes, so more questions, yes? It's a great question, and I won't waste my precious time telling you that I'm an expert on GDPR and others, but one of my colleagues, if we meet out in the back, we could talk a little bit more about that. But essentially, from a GDPR perspective, data privacy officer, same type of things, we have almost, I don't want to say exact parity, but we have things that are equivalent. I don't want to say they're completely apples to apples, but if we crack the code on continuous monitoring of transactions to mitigate risk, we have the ability to do auditing, monitoring, archiving, reporting. I think we have enough, but there will be gaps. And so we could probably talk about it after, but I don't want to blow smoke or anything. Thank you. And I was told to prepare for someone asking me a question about Europe, but I summarily, blew it off. I apologize for that. Okay, I got 2.5 minutes. We've been getting some softballs. Any more questions? This is a meme, by the way, that wanted to be private. So that's my meme for this. So I just want to say thanks to Amin for this. The jacket's really dope, too. Thanks, everybody.